This week we deal with social psychology in chapter 13. Only two more chapters to go before the course actually ends besides your final exam. So you are very definitely in the home stretch at this point. So social psychology is defined for you at the bottom of this slide. It deals with social interactions, their origins, their effects on the individual. A lot of students in the past have said, okay, I don't get what the distinction is between social psychology and sociology, and I think I can simplify that a bit. There is some overlap, first of all. I won't deny that. But sociology tends to focus on findings among the group in and of itself. They're not going to delve, sociologists are not going to delve inside the workings of the human brain to see why humans individually behave the way they do. But when humans gather in groups, then they're interested in that. So they're asserting, yes, when this particular thing happens, like there's an overcrowding situation, it's like these are behaviors that might be manifested by those groups. Whereas social psychology, certainly we would start at that point where the sociologist left off and then get into a finer tuned idea of what's going on inside the heads of people as individuals who find themselves in an overcrowded situation. So hopefully that clears things up a bit. I guess we're dealing with a micro versus macro element in this particular point. Okay, so social cognition, you should know what cognition is already from an earlier chapter. When we are looking at the term social cognition, we're adding the element of society, a person's thoughts about other people and the social world they live in. Attributions come from the word attribute or attribute. Attributions are explanations of the causes of behavior. Now, we in social psychology have come up with this whole idea of attribution theory. So we assert that humans behave in a particular way when they are looked at, when they're examined in groups, because of certain personality traits they may have that are within the individual. However, we cannot reduce human beings to just their personalities. Sometimes a situation, the environment, can also impact an individual's behavior. Then we move from there to the fundamental attribution error. So here's the deal. Here's the error. I can simplify this and you will be able to wrap your head around to what I'm saying about this, because we're all guilty of it. You're driving. Okay, there's a jerk on the highway. They're tailgating you or they're speeding and blowing at you because you didn't go fast enough even though you're in the slow lane, right? And so you think, now that's a real asshole. Now, when you look at the 5-factor inventory, being an asshole isn't one of the personality traits, but it certainly is a low score probably on agreeableness. So what we're going to do, those of us who are in that car, and here's the jerk in the car doing this, we're going to say, that guy's personality or that gal's personality, they're really, they're off the chain. I can't stand this person, right? So if we get inside that person's head, though, what may we discover? We may discover it's not that individual's personality at all, but maybe their spouse or their partner or their main squeeze broke up with them that morning. They're just having a generally bad day, right? So it's the environment that causes their behavior. So one thing I caution you against is not necessarily jumping to the conclusion that when somebody is in a bad mood or they misbehave in some way, that it's because of a reflection of their personality. It could be. I'm not going to lie about that. It could very well be. But a lot of times it's just because of the situations they find themselves in. So that is the fundamental attribution error. We give too much weight to the influence of personalities rather than to the situation or circumstances surrounding the individual. you already know what an attitude is. What we know how we feel, right? It operates on both the cognitive level and the emotional level, right? So we know what a lot of our attitudes are. Those are explicit attitudes. The ones like, yeah, my attitude towards school is this. My attitude toward my psychology professor is this. However, there may be some things, like particularly if you're going into a situation where you encounter difference or strangeness, then some implicit attitudes may bubble to the surface. So an implicit attitude is a little more difficult to acknowledge. So the explicit attitude that you can express very readily without looking too deeply on the inside there. This comes from the more rational, reasonable part of our brain, the frontal cortex, where implicit attitudes are actually stirred up at the emotional level, and we know that the amygdala is associated with that particular emotional level of the brain. Okay, I'm not going to spend much time on this slide because I think Dr. Pomerantz does a pretty dang good job at going through all of this. We've all used foot in the door phenomenon before. We do it as adults, and we certainly did it as a child. You know how you keep like pleasing our caregiver, mom and dad, just a little bit at a time. We figure, hey, can I do you think it would be okay if I go with my friends to a concert Saturday night? And once you get the affirmative, you got the foot in the door. If they say, "Oh yeah, you're a good kid, sure you can do it." And I like your friend Megan, so I know you're in good company. Well, I appreciate that, but could I use your Mercedes to drive us down there? Because my car, when I'm not even sure to make it 40 miles, and that's how far we have to go to get the concert venue. And Megan's car she just wrecked it, so I don't want to get in the same car with her. It's in the shop and won't be ready by the time the concert occurs. So can I take your Mercedes? And so, all right, if the parent says, "Oh, sure, not a problem, I understand," and let you have the keys to the Mercedes, and it's like, cool, all right. Now, you might stop there, or you might say, "Well, I'm running a little short on cash," because you're thinking we want to go to a nice restaurant, and I'm not really running short on cash to buy the ticket, but it would be nice to have a little bit of a buffer there. So you say, "I'm running a little short on cash. Can you spare another $50?" Okay, so you've relied on those feet in the door because you've already set it up with two questions, and you keep winding your way upward to get more and more for this individual, right? Certainly your parent is going to certainly find a place where they are going to go, "Oh, no, 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 it ends here. I am not giving you $50. I'm already letting you drive my Mercedes, for God's sake." Role playing. If any of you have ever seen the Stanford Prison Experiment, which is a movie that's probably over 10 years old at this point, but it's still considered a contemporary movie. It's very good. It's about Philip Zimbardo's experiment at Stanford University in California. And it all had to do with role playing. And doing role playing actually turned some Stanford University students into real jerks and others into milquetoast. Because what he did was to assign roles as prison guards to a group of male students. To the others, they were prisoners. All right, and he had set some ground rules that were ultimately violated, like no physical contact and so forth. I mean, we had those prison guards who were college students. They weren't really prison guards who were doing, utilizing terrorism tactics to bring their fellow students under their control, the ones who were playing prisoners. So if you are interested in seeing how role-playing has an effect on our cognition and emotions, that's a wonderful movie to watch. And then cognitive dissonance, we've already dealt with before. I think it was on getting out of the racist or white supremacist lifestyle a few chapters back. All that means is once you're exposed to something that you have a very definitive, explicit attitude about, and then whatever situation you're in, things are different, then you begin to re-examine things because of dissonance, right? So your situation that you've thrown yourself into doesn't match what your attitude is. Okay, you know what conformity is, you know what peer pressure is. we say group pressure because group pressure doesn't apply just to peer pressure, and neither does social psychology study only peer pressure. But that's what we're most familiar with. When our peers conform to something, a lot of times we are more likely to conform. So here's a list of things when we are most likely to conform. We will conform if we're insecure in an environment or we don't feel competent. If there's 3 people or more, we are more likely to conform. If everybody else agrees, we conform. And there are 4 other examples on this list as well. And may I remind you that all of these more long elongated PowerPoints are at the bottom of all your modules that you have access to all the time. Okay, so obedience kind of follows the same kind of strain here. We tend to obey when there's an authority figure present or they're the ones giving orders. We are obedient when the authority figure comes from a renowned institution. You know, if somebody has a doctorate degree from Harvard University, we may give them more academic respect than we might somebody who graduates from a small private institution. When you feel depersonalized, in other words, you're not regarded as fully human, or there are no role models in the picture, or you don't have well-developed sense of morality, then you are going to tend to obey more so. Okay, and then of course when others are disobedient, that pulls you into. Continuing with group influence, there are such things as social facilitation. So social facilitation comes into play when responses to our individual tasks, they become stronger in the presence of others. If you've ever been on stage, you know the energy of the crowd facilitates your ability to perform well, right? I mean, you thrive on that energy. It's like that applause, that acceptance by the audience serves as fuel for you, right? So that's a good example, I think. Same thing with sports. If you're an athlete and you're on the field or on the court and you hear the cheers coming from the crowd, that again is like a high test gasoline fueling you on. Social loafing, those of you who are very sharp students to whom school comes very easily and academics come easily, and you've had to work in groups, you may have experienced social loafing firsthand. So basically, social loafing refers to working in a group, and the group's efforts are pooled together in order to solve a common task. And if you are perceived as the most gung-ho or the smartest in the group, the other people in the group may tend to sort of nudge things in your direction. And so how many of you have been in a group and it feels like most of the work fell on your shoulders because, damn it, you were not going to get a bad grade on the assignment. And in fact, you wanted an A. So, to hell with the rest of them, because they're dumping it all on me. So social loafing isn't you, the person who's gung-ho about it, but it's the people who are dragging their feet or loafing in terms of getting stuff done. And then de-individuation. You lose self-awareness, self-restraint, and accountability when a group situation arouses you, right? So here's an example, I think. You're on social media and you see, because you don't do it, but you see somebody fat shaming somebody, or somebody just totally spreading all kinds of salacious rumors on somebody else who's a social media user just because they don't like them, right? Dance clubs foster de-individuation. So if you're in the dance club, of course, alcohol sometimes has something to do with that as well. But a lot of times in dance clubs, you behave a little wilder because everybody else is kind of doing that too. Hate groups and gangs, same thing. All right. The difference between group polarization and group think is that group polarization extremity becomes more of the point, right? It's a tendency for a group's attitudes about something to become more extreme as a direct result of group discussions. So, for example, if you don't like Jewish people, then if you're in a group that's anti-Semitic, then you may spend a lot of your group meeting time talking about why Jewish people are total jerks, why you have to distrust them, why they're anti-democratic, and whatever other buzzwords you can attach to that group. So that's group polarization. So you see you're separating yourself from other groups in the mainstream. Groupthink is different from polarization, because basically groupthink means we put people together, and you've been in groups like this. I have, in work groups with other faculty members for that matter, where it's like, yeah, we want to get this task done in a hurry, so come on, let's do it. And so you go to the fastest solution more than you go for the best solution, just because you want to get the job done. All right? So the way to get around that is to encourage disagreement, like, no, yeah, we appreciate your contribution, but that's too fast. Let's do a little more deep thinking about this. Okay, prejudice. We move into the darker side, even darker than we've already talked about in terms of social psychology. So, prejudice, you probably already know, is a combination of prejudging, right? So these are judgments about or attitudes about some group that's based on stereotypes. It's based on negative emotions, whether it's hostility, envy, or fear, and also a discriminatory attitude. That group becomes sort of an outgroup to you, and we need to kind of push them down because they are inferior to our superiority. Okay, so those three parts are important. Okay, so where does that come from? What are the roots of prejudice from a social psychology standpoint? Well, I can remember, because I'm old enough to have grown up, when I grew in like well over a half a century ago, right? Like 67 years ago, my life on this planet began. And so I remember, since I lived in a small town in the South, segregation. I remember, a lot of the overt racism that was going on, a lot of the aggressions and the microaggressions that were going on. One thing I do remember even now, that the individuals in that town would often say, is that if these people, meaning black citizens in that community, if they were favored by God, or if they worked hard, or you fill in the blank with some quality that the dominant culture group felt they were lacking, if they were like these things, then they would have rewards. So that's just world phenomenon. It's like this belief, and I hope you realize that this doesn't hold water, right? This is not reality based. The just world phenomenon refers to the idea that if you are good, whatever good means, that you are rewarded, and if you are bad, then you're going to be punished. So in this in that small southern town, the people who probably were lowest on the socioeconomic ladder were black citizens, right? And so essentially they were the have-nots. And so they must be bad, and those of us who had very pale skin, very pale faces, must be good. All right? Stereotypes. Please learn this if you don't know, because I encounter students from time to time that are not real clear on stereotypes. These are inequalities that we have rationalized inside our heads, right? So they are beliefs about a group's characteristics that are applied generally and often inaccurately to group members. Anytime you say all Jewish people, all black people, all Latino people, right? All Asian people, the minute that kind of sentence begins, you are probably you are probably playing with fire, playing with stereotypes, actually. I mean, there is a story that we tell in social psychology quite frequently about an elementary age Asian kid in a classroom in the United States. And, he was horrible at math. And so the stereotype in that classroom among the teacher as well as among the students was that you're from Japan. You should be good at math. What's wrong with you? Okay? So you can imagine how ostracized a person would feel with those kinds of comments. Okay. Continuing with prejudice very quickly, we'll be able to wrap this up. Do keep in mind that there is an in-group, meaning us, against the out-group, them. So the in-group refers to people with whom we share a common identity, and this really happens a lot in the school system. Not so much in college, hopefully, but certainly in elementary, middle, and high school. And then the out-group refers to those who are not worthy of being in our in-group, right? Okay, and so when we say out-group homogeneity, that refers to the whole idea that those members of the out-group, that they all share the same attributes, right? So we have some evolutionary psychologists and probably some evolutionary sociologists too who have looked at this and said, where does this come from? Why are human beings prone to do stereotypes, to be prejudiced? And so one of the theories that have come from evolutionary psychology is that survival in prehistory, when we look at our ancestors, the hominids, when we look at those groups, cave dwellers, that basically survival depended on their ability to form these in-groups because, there's only so many saber-toothed tigers that you can have access to, that you can kill and eat, provide warm clothing, right? So it could be that that's kind of encoded in our racial memory. Okay, so let's see. Oh, and there's another scapegoat theory too. There's another theory about prejudice I remember from that small southern town. I'm going to mention that one, and I don't think I'm spending any more time on this slide except for that. I also remember that. I remember a couple of families who had jobs that were not very well-paying jobs, right? And so they looked at resources in the community and in the workforce as very limited. And once the government stepped in and say, we got to get rid of all this prejudicial segregation crap, right? And then people of color found their ways into various workplaces that they did not have access to before, then what would happen is those white individuals would say things like, I think I could probably get a raise, but we've got to provide for all of these dark-skinned people who are taking away jobs from the more worthy and the more valuable white workers. So that's scapegoat. We're finding somebody else to blame for something that probably has some other very definitive reason for occurring. Then we move into aggression. We know that aggression is a problem, has become a bit more of a problem during the pandemic, probably because of some of the brain changes that have occurred to us as far as some of the social isolation that has occurred, and even we're finding out more and more there are some cognitive changes that may be occurring from the COVID virus itself. Now the thing about it, we are by nature aggressive creatures. I mean, aggression is observed between the ages of 1 and 3. I mean, one of the first things that little infants will do is ball their little hands up into a fist, right? And if you put your finger into the palm of their hand, they're going to make a fist around that finger, correct? I'm sort of exaggerating the reason for that, as you know from developmental chapter. Anyway, 25% we've observed of interactions for kids ages 1 to 3 are aggressive. So there's a 50-50 balance between nature versus nurture. So genetics accounts for 50% of our proclivity to be aggressive, right? If there are a lot of aggressive people in your family history, then you are more likely to be aggressive, but also the environment has 50% impact as well, roughly speaking, of course. So it is the interaction, this tendency toward aggression is the interaction of biology and experience. And part of the biological part of it has to do with testosterone. Okay, so testosterone in women, there's a small amount of it, is responsible for females to become sexually aroused, right? Testosterone is a sex hormone that occurs most frequently in males, in biological males, right? But testosterone can cause aggression, and it does. And so basically, circulating in the bloodstream, it affects neural systems in the brain that control aggression. So we're talking about the amygdala for one thing, right? So we take a look at high testosterone, and when we examine this, we see testosterone levels in some criminals that have been apprehended, that they are higher than normal. So that's one of the things. Another thing, as far as the brain is concerned, is that when we've studied violent criminals in our penal history, we've discovered that some of the activity in the frontal lobes, where we reason things out in a rational way, and also kind of establish some degree of control over our emotions, that there's diminished activity in that higher functioning area. Okay, then more about aggression. There was a study that was done about ice cream and how it caused aggression, and here's what social psychologists determined. Oh my God, when ice cream sales go up, violent incidences and crimes go up as well. Oh my God, ice cream. What is it about ice cream that's causing violence? Well, think about it from your frontal lobe position, right? You think about it, ice cream is going to have a better sales record in the hot months than in the colder months. So obviously, heat, we have discovered too, can cause people to feel frustration and even a little bit more aggressive as a result of the heat if you can't find an escape out of it, right? So that's the reason that the hotter we were in Florida during the pandemic, that there was a higher incidence of the virus. And that's because of the fact that when it's hotter in Florida, more people come inside because it's just too damn oppressively hot to spend a lot of time outside. You go inside, then you got gatherings of people together, then the spread of the virus is much more likely there. So that's the reason it's kind of opposite to what goes on in the northern climes. All right, so that's the frustration aggression principle. Let's see. Income levels. Now, it is in taking a look at aggression, aggressive incidences, and aggressive crimes, and also socioeconomic status, we have discovered that there is a big difference between those who have access to a lot of financial resources and those who don't. So what we have found out is that crime rates seem to be higher among those who have lower income levels than those who have higher ones. And I think if you really consider that, you can see why that might be true. You're frustrated, you've got you're in a position of need and desire, and so it's like, what can I do to change my lot in life at this point? And so you might do things that are violent, that are illegal. Okay. Then we move into our next to the last topic, which is attraction and romance. Let's dispel one thing right away, and that is internet form relationships. I had a secretary before I moved back into teaching, who actually met her current husband on the internet. They've been together longer than 2 years. They've been married for I guess we're heading toward 20 years at this point. So what we've discovered in taking a look at those internet form relationships is that they're not as fragile as some people would like us to think. In fact, internet form relationships between people who get a crush while they're interacting with people online, and then they meet them and they decide they're going to spend time together to develop a romantic relationship, they are more likely to have formed a relationship that lasts over 2 years. So let's not disparage internet form relationships too much. I mean, obviously, you've got to be careful. You've got to spend time getting to know that individual that you may want to meet ultimately. We have newspapers that have instances of people who are getting killed or beaten up as a result of finding somebody online and then not waiting till there's some knowledge shared between them or any chance to feel a little weird about that person you contacted. So there are three ingredients that occur that three ingredients to a love relationship. Proximity, we're more likely to fall in love with somebody who is close to us, all right? Also, they need to be physically attractive. Now, sometimes what happens is that attraction to somebody will kind of like maybe not all be there. You might, there's some things I don't find particularly attractive, but he, she, or they have really grand personality, and so after a while you begin to see that person as more attractive and the romance builds. And then also, it's not that opposites attract so much, it's actually similarity attracts. When you find that you have attitudes and beliefs and interests that are similar to one another's, then that's another ingredient for making a romantic relationship work. Another interesting point here is that last bullet point is that most of us see ourselves as hot, man. We look in the mirror and it's like, you are hot, right? We don't view ourselves as unattractive at all. So, and that's probably good, right? Or if we all thought we were ugly, then we never go out and we never be fulfilled from a romantic point of view. And so those of us who aren't hot, a lot of times we look at attractive people and, oh, y'all are just great. Well, they have their own little anxieties and neuroses too, because they question the good things they hear about themselves from time to time, because they think, well, is that just a reaction to my looks? I don't want to be known as somebody who is hot. I want to be known as somebody who has substance. Okay. I'm not sure why I left that in there. Okay, so there are three types of love. Passionate love is the most short-lived kind of love, and that's when it's like that urge to merge occurs. You need somebody, you're attracted to them, you feel like you can't be without them, and all you're thinking about when you are apart is that main squeeze, right? So it's an intensely aroused state of being absorbed with the other individuals, all right? And then from there, if you stay together long enough, then that passionate love becomes companionate love. Now, hopefully the erotic element stays there. Doesn't always, but hopefully it does, and that becomes companionate love when it's not only is my partner or my main squeeze hot, he, she, or they also happens to be my best or one of my best friends. Okay, so that's another level you've moved that relationship to. And then consummate love means that there is a wonderfully ideal blend of passion, of intimacy, that very close friendship, and also commitment. I don't see myself going through the rest of my life with anyone other than you. So consummate love is the best of the best in terms of romance, right? And altruism refers to this whole idea of doing something good for someone and not really expecting anything in return. I question whether altruism really exists, and we have studies that leave room for that doubt, because even if you're doing something because it's a good thing to do, or because my religion tells me to do that, it's like you're still thinking about getting some intrinsic kind of award. I don't or reward. I don't know of any situation where somebody can be truly altruistic and not feel like they're getting something in return, whether it's money, whether it's good feelings about yourself because you did this good deed. I mean, that's still exchange, right? And so anyway, I got into a big discussion with a student of mine in a face-to-face class about it because he considered himself, I am altruistic and I don't have these other. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to argue about what's going on inside your head. But I need, personally, between you and me, I need more people to come out and say that that is true of them as well. Okay, so the bystander intervention or bystander effect refers to the idea that you see in the upper picture on this slide. It's like something bad happens to somebody, and we particularly associate big cities with this. Everybody gathers around, but nobody's extending their hand to help, right? So when are you likely to help somebody? I mean, this guy either just he looks pained. So, I mean, maybe he was assaulted. But first of all, you got to see the incident. Next, you've got to interpret the incident as an emergency, and you've got to assume responsibility. You also ask yourself this: how much is this going to cost me? Not necessarily in terms of money, but how much time out of my life will helping this dude take? You know, is this going to screw up the rest of my day if I help? So that also contributes to that as well. Now, I want you to, I'm not sure whether I gave this as an assignment or not, but there's a woman by the name of Kitty Genovese, was a woman, she's dead now, but in New York, she screamed for help for 20 minutes, and no one came to help. Finally, a phone call was made to the police, but it was too late. She was found dead at the foot of the stairwell leading upstairs in her apartment building to her apartment. So she had been assaulted, and nobody helped. Okay, so we will help when there's reciprocity involved. That means that you expect something in return for it. Social responsibility, you should help those who depend on us. And social exchange theory, that we compare, as I mentioned a minute ago, the benefits and costs to helping. Now, there's a kinship theory that also goes along with this, and that indicates that we help our family members first before we branch out into people beyond our kinship circle. So that's it. Sorry if I went over the 30 minutes, but this kind of is a heady chapter. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me, and have a good week.